and always to see you. It's all right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First of all, I'd like to make a mention of the fact that today was the yortzeit of my great teacher, Nechama Leibovitz, Aleha Shalom, Professor Nechama Leibovitz. She was a person of stunning character, exceptional brilliance and dedication to the Jewish people and to the Torah that Hashem has given us. And so we'll dedicate this year to her memory. She inspired thousands of people, and without question, her inspiration extends to me. And I'd like to share a little of that with you this evening. Just one moment. Okay, here we go. Parshat Metzorah, usually Tazria and Metzorah come together. Of course, this week is not only the Parsha of Tazria of Metzorah, it is, of course, Shabbat HaGadol, and it is the Shabbat just before Pesach. So I'm going to talk this evening about Tzarat Habayit. It's called leprosy, for lack of a better term. I remember Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik Zatzal many years ago gave shiurim gave his shiurim on what a tzarat really was. We're not going to focus on that now. Perhaps that should really be for scholarly articles. But for us this evening, we're going to talk about Tzarat HaBayit. We're going to talk about the Jewish home and how the two merge together. First, I'd like to ask you to turn to Perek Yud Daled in Vayikra, Parshat Metzorah. And in it, we find, of course, the Pasuk Lamed Daled. In it, we find the Torah's statement about the mitzvah, shall we say, the plague of tzarat on a house, and the mitzvot that come with it. And the Torah says, Ki tavo el eretz Canaan. When you come into the land of Canaan, Hashem gives this mitzvah to Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jews of the Midbar. Asher ani notein lachem la'achuzah, that I give to you for a possession or a holding. Le'echoz means to hold on to. That means houses in Eretz Israel can have private ownership, with the exception of Yerushalayim, as we will see. V'natati negat tzarat, and I, Hashem himself, takes personal conduct to impose the negat tzarat, this tzarat, this abnormal element into the house, Beveit Eretz Achuzatchem. Now, we are told that the idea of Tzarat HaBayit is more theoretical than it is historical. Meforshim talk about it, that there are two things. Number one, the Tzarat itself does not apply to Yerushalayim, because ownership in Yerushalayim is really very, very limited. The sense of limited ownership, as we will see a little bit later as we talk about Yerushalayim. And also, Chazal tell us that it never came about. The Tzarat HaBayit never really came about. Now, Rashi, on the other hand, on these psukim, says to us, seems to be that Tzarat is a part of the life of the Jews, as we will see in Eretz Canaan. Here it is. Rashi tells us that the purpose of the Tzarat is to actually strengthen our emunah, So what does it mean? He says, how did the Tzarat came? God gave it to us, but also it is in itself, what Rashi proclaims is Besorah Tova. It actually is an act of compassion on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is that when the people, the Amorim, as Rashi calls them, the people who lived in Canaan at that time, sometimes you'll find them called Amorim, sometimes you'll find them called Canaanim. They were given names, each of the names of the various different nations that were there. Nations then, of course, were relatively small. So sometimes the Torah refers to them as Amoroi. That's what Rashi calls it. The Sorahi, it is a lahem. It in fact is good news for the Jews. Shehanagaim ba'im aleim. That the nega of the bayit, this tzarat habayit, is good news. The fishet minu emoriyim matmoniot, because the Amorites actually hid their treasures inside the walls of their houses, shel zahav, whatever they had of gold, etc., in the walls. Kol arba'im shana shar Yisrael b'midbar. They put them, these inhabitants of Canaan, the Amorim, placed them in their houses. Al yedei hanega nutatz habayit umotzon. Through the nega, through this tzarat that would come to them, that house, the Jew, of course, would have to actually disassemble the bricks at the place of the nega, and there, when they disassembled the bricks and the wall is disassembled, then they found the treasures that the Amorites, the Amorim, placed in the walls. The principle itself is an important one for all of us, and that is the very things or the very events or occurrences that we feel may be punishment, may be severe punishment for us, ultimately is for the good. Now, again, here the person finds the tzarat in the house, and he says, "Oy vavoy, now I have tzarat in the house, and I what am I going to do?" But the answer is that sometimes things are not as they appear. It appears to be, to the person who found it, it appears to be a tragedy for him. Turns out that there he finds the gold. It's not always that simple, not always that way. Sometimes not even in our lifetime do we find the gold, but it is. Whatever God does is for ultimate good. So this is Rashi's firm belief. And of course, the objective then is when one finds this tzarat, this abnormal growth of some sort in the house itself, he's to go to a Kohen. He's not to decide anything on his own. He has to go to the Kohen. Another very important message about Judaism. Not only do we have to realize that ultimately things are for good, we also have to realize that we can't do everything ourselves. If Rebbe Elyashiv, the great Rebbe Elyashiv, or the great Reb Chaim Kanievsky, or the great Rabbi Yoshe Ber Levi Soloveitchik were in Eretz Yisrael, and he would find a nega, he would find tzarat in the house, these are the great poskim of our age. These are the great determiners of Jewish law, not allowed to decide it themselves. They have to go to a Kohen, who probably knows much less about anything than they know, but their obligation is not to make the decision on their own. Kenega nirali babai. It appears to be that this is a tzarat habayit or nega habayit, and that's how it's done. That we as Jews, it's very important, especially in the age in which we live. We have to learn to depend upon others and not just to make our own determinations about things. Of course, by learning Torah as much as we do and giving our children yeshiva education, day school education, all of that, of course, is to help to make them not independent of others or independent, but to be able to make decisions based upon the Torah that they know, always realizing that theirs is not the final decision. So there we have this mitzvah of tearing down the house, or tearing down at least that part of the house, and creating a situation where they are to go to the Kohen and have the decision rendered. Now we're going to talk a little bit about tzarat habayit. You know, Chazal tell us that tzarat is associated with Lashon Hara. Associated with Lashon Hara. And now notice I'm saying associated with. I think it's important for us to realize in general, when Chazal make associations between some sort of illness or some sort of tragic event, some sort of life event, and a human misbehavior, it is not for you and me to decide that this person who was afflicted, God forbid, with such and such a disease or such and such an accident, that it is not for us to determine, oh, you know what it must be? They talked Lashon Hara. You know what it must be? They did some other Aveira which the Gemara associates with it. I oftentimes give the example, if we talk about, let's say, antibiotics, we talk about bacterial infections. So we know that antibiotics can cure bacterial infections. Now, the question is, if I have an antibiotic in my house and somebody has a bacterial infection, I say, you know what, I got leftover stuff. Why don't I give it to you? I hope nobody would take it. Why? Because you have to know how to use it. It's not just that the infection can be cured through antibiotics, but one has to know the dosage, how often. All of those things require expertise. So when people, see, and it's unfortunately more common than it should be, when people associate illnesses or pain, another person's pain, with some sort of wrong that they did, that they claim to have done, or they've concluded that person has done, that is wrong. Should never be applied. But it's certainly safe and correct to say that tzarat is associated with Lashon Hara. So if I see that I have something that's even akin to it, I say to myself, you know what, maybe I better check. Maybe I've been saying things that I shouldn't be saying. So that's what we have here. Now, Rav Hirsch, who was born in 1808 and died in 1888 in Germany, was the head of the Orthodox Jewish community, certainly in southern Germany. He lived a remarkable life, a remarkably creative person. He talked a lot about symbolism. That's first of all. He wrote many, many works. And he knew that he had to be in strong and close communication with his Frankfurt community. And in fact, he was both in writing and of course in person. I want to read to you a selection on tzarat habayit that Rabbi Yoshe Ber, I'm not Rabbi Yoshe, I'm sorry, that Rav Hirsch wrote. He says as follows: of all the social sins that generally provoke Metzorah as signs of divine displeasure, the sages single out one in particular to which leprous marks on houses are addressed, first and foremost. The egotism, he doesn't mention Lashon Hara here. He says the egotism that makes a person refuse to render brotherly services to his fellow man. Now, by the way, we have a term for this in Hebrew, and it's called tzarat ayin, a person who is stingy. Usually we're stingy, why? Usually, not always, but usually we're stingy because we think it's our money. When that person comes to our door and asks for a donation, assuming that it's been verified, that the donation he's asking for is legitimate, and that is, by the way, we need to do, and Baruch Hashem, we have in our community means by which we verify the person's request and the person's condition. But once that's been verified, I have to say, it's not my money, it's Hashem's money. It's the money that is given to me so that I should disperse it. How is it mine? I can determine to give as much to one or another, or to one group or another group. That's up to me, but it's not my money. I'm a gizbor, I'm a treasurer. Each and every one of us is. So he says, egotism makes a person refuse to render brotherly services to his fellow man. The selfishness that makes an individual view his house as his alone. That sodomite principle, which perverts the principle of private property. What I have is mine, and what you have is yours. It forgets that the law that separates the property of one person from another exists side by side with the obligation that is no less binding, that of brotherly love. So Rav Hirsch ties, I think, a very common malady, social malady that we all have. We tend to think it's all ours. It's all ours. And so therefore, if I'm giving the money to tzedakah, it's my money and I'm giving it to tzedakah. No. Let's say a person earns $100,000 a year. And now, why did he earn $100,000 a year? First of all, of course, he had to work for it. There's no question about that. Well, let's say he earns $100,000 a year. He gets $100,000 because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was determined that that person should be giving dispersing $10,000 in tzedakah, not the other way around. You earned $100,000 and therefore you have to give 10,000. HaKadosh Baruch Hu deems that you should be giving $10,000. Well, in order to do that, then you have to earn $100,000. That's another way to look at it, rather than it's my money and I'll make all the decisions. So Rav Hirsch says this. Now, notice Rav Hirsch associates this with what he calls the sodomite principle, Sodom. What do we know about Sodom? Sodom was the city of absolute sarat ayin. It was a city of absolute stinginess. Why? Because they said, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. When they took it to an extreme, of course, in Sodom. We're going to talk about a tale of two cities in just a moment. But in the city that was called Sodom, what did they do? They decided that they took what we would call capitalism, what a person earns, to an extreme. You earn an amount, fine, you keep it. I'm keeping mine, but you better not break your leg. You better not get sick. You better not have some other catastrophe, because if you didn't earn it, you don't get it. There was no such thing as a social safety net in Sodom. There was no such thing as chesed. Chesed, by definition, is I give money to someone, money or some other worthwhile material to someone who technically did not earn it from me, but I do chesed. Every time I bring a guest into my home, I'm doing chesed. Okay, now that's Sodom did not know of chesed at all, and so therefore, Rav Hirsch says the whole idea here is for you to realize the house isn't yours; it's yours on loan, and we have of course laws of possession. We have certainly Baba Metzorah, Baba Kama, Baba Batra. These are all masechtas that deal with property rights, absolutely, but we ultimately have to know that the property that we are claiming is not owned outright. Now, we have here in Pirkei Avot, I'm going to quote a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot with you, which talks about how a person needs to look at his house and his household. Okay. This is Perek Aleph Mishnah Hey. Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim. Listen, he was Ish Yerushalayim. That's going to be important. By the way, I do a lot of by the ways here, right? By the way, when you go to Israel next, should you go to Metzorah, there is the most inspiring sign I think that I can ever see. When you get after you've gone to Metzorah and you're ready to leave, there's a sign. If you turn left, you'll be on the road to go to Yerushalayim. And if you turn right, you'll be on the road to go to Sodom. So you get right down to the bottom of Metzorah, And this magnificent sign, and it's simply a street sign. It's not intended necessarily to teach us magnificent lessons, but it does. The sign pointing to the right as you're coming down says, to the right, Sodom, and to the left points Yerushalayim. The two are mutually exclusive territory. Yerushalayim is the Amud HaChesed, and of course, Sodom is the opposite. And it's a good thing to know about. And that's why one of the reasons I think refers to people who are stingy when it comes to their homes as Sodomite. Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim makes the following statement. Your household should be open wide. And the poor people should be sons of your house, or shall we say, like family members. Now, there's three ways to interpret this beautiful statement by Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim. We're talking about a Yerushalmi here. We're talking about a person who knows what chesed is. He says, you need, one way to look at the Me'aniyim be your family, they should feel at home in your house. They should be able to say, I can go, I can go to this house and I can be and I can be accepted. I got to tell you, it's not a matter to brag, but I heard a wonderful thing about one of my grandchildren talk about one of his aunts. Won't say which grandchild and I won't say which aunt, but he loved the book about Rabbi Akiva. And he read the story, his mother read the story to him over and over again because he wanted to hear it about Rabbi Akiva going from place to place, from door to door, and he was very poor. He and Rachel were very poor when they first got married, and no one would take them in. So the grandchild turned to his mother and said, he should go to Auntie so-and-so. I know she'll let him in. She lets everybody in. All right. So this is what we do when we raise a Jewish home and we bring Jewish values to a Jewish home, and people see those values. He's growing up with values. This aunt unintentionally taught her nephew the importance of the Yuanim b'nei veitecha. People who need you should feel comfortable in your house. So that's one way to interpret this phrase. It's in Pirkei Avot, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Hey. The second way to interpret it is that, and a number of Meforshim mention it, that when you're going to hire help for your house, if you can afford to pay help, don't go outside of the Jewish community. If there are poor people, this is an opportunity for them to become gainfully employed so they can be, once again, have some measure of independence. So don't take in necessarily, again, there's nothing against non-Jewish people, but you have your first obligation to Jews who may need to be able to be a part of this. So the Rashbats and others, the Rambam mentions it too. He says, whenever you can, you should employ Jewish people so that they will become, so they will have some measure of independence. So that's the second. One is people who are poor should feel comfortable in your house. Two, that people who are, if you're going to employ people, try to employ Jewish people who are poor. They should be, B'nei Veitcha here does not mean like your family, it means employed in your house. The third interpretation is so novel, so beautiful. It says, the yu aniyim b'nei veitecha. An ani can be a poor person, but to be an anav is to be a humble person, one who realizes that but for the grace of God, I go there. So according to this third view, it's yu aniyim b'nei veitecha, that the people, your own children, your own household, should be anavim. They should be people who are humble, realizing that what they get is not necessarily what they have earned, but by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's grace, they're able to help other people and to accept it. So that's this Mishnah itself. And of course, Yerushalayim, one thing that we need to know, of course, is Yerushalayim was noted for its hospitality. It was noted for hospitality. And the Mishnah in the Parakeh of Pirkei Avot, again, the last Mishnah we read was Parak Aleph of Pirkei Avot. Parakeh of Pirkei Avot is as follows. It's fairly famous, this fairly well known. Of course, in this season of the year, we talk a lot about miracles. And in the fifth parak, the fifth Mishnah, the Tana says 10 nisim occurred to our forefathers or our ancestors in the Beit HaMikdash. And we're not going to go through all of them right now because time does not really allow it. But the last of the 10 is a very telling nes. Lo amar Adam, here's the last of the nisim. Lo amar Adam lachavero sar li hamakom she'alim b'Yerushalayim. When the Jews came from all over Eretz Israel, and even from the Galut as well, they would come to Yerushalayim on Pesach, on Sukkot, on Shavuot. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people were accommodated. They weren't allowed to charge. We took them up, and the Mishnah says, not this one, but the Mishnah says they would hold out like cloth. People would know, oh, here's a vacancy. Here's a place where we can go. This is, of course, the antithesis of Sodom. And it says, a person never said to his friend, Sar li amakom, that I had no place to be, to stay, to lodge in Yerushalayim. Never happened. Everybody always found a place due to the graciousness of the people of Yerushalayim and, of course, the culture of Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh. Now, I think one of the things that's really important to note, the Mishnah could have said everybody always had a place to sleep in Yerushalayim. What's this circuitous statement? V'lo amar Adam l'chaver, a person never said to his friend, it was difficult for me to find a place to lodge in Yerushalayim. Just simply say everybody lodged in Yerushalayim or found ease in lodging in Yerushalayim. I think this in itself is an ace. Because if it was crowded, we know when they stood in the Beis HaMikdash, when they stood, they were all cramped. But yet when they bowed down, when they were involved in the Avodat Hashem in the Beit HaMikdash, there was room for everybody. That in itself is an ace. And that nobody ever turned and said, well, maybe it was hard for them to find a place. They never turned to the guy next to them and said, I couldn't find a place. Because after all, if he couldn't find a place, the guy next to him was part of the problem, right? So that in itself is one of the nisim. But that the Jews in Yerushalayim understood Yerushalayim is different from every other place in the world. Now, I'd like to conclude with a remarkable passage from the Medrash Rabbi on our mitzvah or of Tzarat Habayit. The pasuk says in Vayikra, where we learn that Siva HaKohen, when a person finds a nega, what he thinks is a nega, and then he goes to have it validated to a Kohen, who probably, again, if we're talking about Rabbi Yoshe Bar Soloveitchik, or we're talking about Rebbe Elchanan Wasserman, guaranteed the Kohen knew less than he did, but he still had to go to the Kohen. Okay. Nobody is an island. The Tziva Kohen, and then the Kohen should say, I've determined that this is a tzarat, ufinu et habayit. They have to literally clear out the house. Okay. And then he said, but you should know, the Baal Medrash then quotes a pasuk in Malachim, Vayikach et otzrot Beit Hashem. When it came to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, it says they cleared out the treasury of the Beit HaMikdash. And then he destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, and so therefore the Baal Medrash says it's not just talking about a person's individual bayit. It's talking about the bayit. Then it says, "V'hotzi el michutz lamachaneh," and the person is supposed to go into. Before we get to that, it says the tzivah kohen. The Kohen here says the Medrash was Yirmiyahu. So we're talking about a historical event in addition to the mitzvah itself. So and then it says, it's supposed to take it outside of the camp. And so therefore, V'ama hegla lebavel, says the Medrash, that really is exemplified by the fact that Jews went into exile when the Beit HaMikdash, the Bayit, was destroyed. Yachol la'olam, I might think that it may be forever that they'll have it. Talmud lomer v'lakchu avanim acherot. They will ultimately take other stones, and those stones will be the formation of the Beit HaMikdash. And then the pasuk says, "V'lachein ko amar Hashem Elokim." Hashem has said, "Hineni yisad b'Tzion oven even." I am going to establish back in Tzion a oven, the stone, even bochan, a stone, a firm stone, pinat yikrat, a cornerstone, musad hamamin lo yachish. It will be established, but it may take time. It may not even happen in our life. But the Medrash says, really, this mitzvah in itself is exemplified through the Beit HaMikdash. The Kohen was Yirmiyahu, and in fact, Uva asher lo abayit, the one who actually owns that house and all houses, Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we start with HaKadosh Baruch Hu being in control, and we conclude with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in control. And so, Be'ezrat Hashem, this Shabbos HaGadol, of course, celebrates the onset of the great miracle that occurred on Pesach, and may each and every one of us have a joyful Pesach, one which is filled with not only joy but the simcha of family, the simcha of mitzvot, the simcha of being together as a community. So Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Next week, I will not. There won't be a shir next week. We won't have another shir until after Pesach. We won't have another shir. Today's the last shir. We will begin the first Shabbat after Pesach, and of course we will announce in the bulletin. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos, kosher Pesach, and Nechamas and Neshama should have an aliyah.
Neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen.